Welcome to the Summercast, a podcast aimed at making fundamentalism great again by applying confessional Baptist doctrine to all of life.
Well, what a good day it is to pick apart a Gospel Coalition article. You know, guys, I don't like doing this. I don't like just picking apart things just 'cause. But occasionally when I run across things that can deceive people who have not had as thorough of an introduction to the topics that are being discussed on there, who are more likely to be deceived by what is written, I feel compelled to respond. And I'm going to do that here. Dr. Wellum, Stephen Wellum, wrote an article for the Gospel Coalition, and the title is 3 Reasons Sunday is Not the Christian Sabbath. Now, the Gospel Coalition has a knack for throwing into uncertainty things that have been long established as orthodox articles of faith. The Sabbath is one of those things, but they do it all the time with other things like critical race theory, intersectionality, the idea that homosexuality, so long as it's internal, a temptation that's internal only and not acted out, that it's not sin, that it's no big deal as long as you just suppress it inside and don't deal with it. You can lust essentially, but you can have a sinful orientation, but you can't. That's not sin. That's not a big deal. So they do things like this all the time, where they throw familiar and settled articles of orthodoxy into question, and it's just part of the downgrade, quite frankly. And here they're doing the same thing, but with the Sabbath. I mean, Dr. Wellum wrote an article against the idea of the Christian Sabbath, and then they had some other guy who wrote in support of it. And so it's like this idea that like this is actually a debatable thing, and it's not. I mean, this is a settled article of orthodoxy, and it's like, where do we get the idea that, if we live post 18th century, we are now of such a mind that we can just go start pulling down all of these acceptable or accepted articles of faith? I mean, it just seems like like we're standing on a pedestal of hubris when we think that we can do that, and I think the Gospel Coalition is case in point. But anyway, I know that sounds harsh, but if you have any familiarity with the Gospel Coalition, you know what I'm talking about. So let's get into this article. I did come prepared this time. Last time I wasn't able to bring you guys into the article, but now I can. So I'm going to do that. I came prepared. I'm so proud of myself. Not really. So here we are. 3 reasons Sunday is not the Christian Sabbath. And I'm not going to go through this sentence by sentence or word by word, but because Dr. Wellum is so organized, he laid it out in 3 easy points to kind of follow here. So let's just go ahead and start with the first one. The Sabbath is not a creation ordinance. One of the reasons I would dispute that, I strongly dispute it, is because God did not rest on the Sabbath day for himself. He rested on the Sabbath day in order to establish a pattern. Okay? He rested on the Sabbath day in order to establish a pattern. And I think one of the ways that we can see that is by looking at Genesis 2:3. If you look at Genesis 2:3, what you find is that God sanctified the Sabbath day. It's not just that God rested on the Sabbath day, but he sanctified it, he set it apart as some day that was special. And it's a day that's not like any of the other days. And so I think that it is a creation ordinance, not by way of an express command, but by way of a pattern that has been established by God himself. Again, he didn't do it for himself. He did it for his people. Why would God be revealed to have rested on the Sabbath? Is it because he actually needed to rest? No. He did it to establish a pattern for his people. And indeed, that pattern is taken into account and is more clearly seen later on in Scripture. But I want to note something else, that in the second sentence of this first paragraph, Wellum says, note, however, that this day is not called the Sabbath. And he's talking about the day that God rested on. It's not called the Sabbath. Well, all the Sabbath means in Hebrew, Sabbat, All it means is seventh day, or all it references is the seventh day of the week. And in the Greek, sabbatismos, all it means is a resting. It's a time or a period of resting. That's all it means. And so the concept is most certainly there. The concept of a Sabbath is most certainly there. And so what Wellum is committing here is a word concept fallacy. He's saying that since the word is not expressly written there, then the concept can't be there as well. And that's a word concept fallacy. But it's the case, actually, that concepts are often present without the explicit wording that usually signifies that concept. So, for example, we say, and even Wellum does this, he says there's a covenant made in Genesis 2, right? There's some kind of covenant made between God and Adam, or God and man, or even God and creation in Wellum's language. If you look at Kingdom Through Covenant, this is a large volume, over 800 pages, up to 1,000 pages that he helped edit. God made a covenant, but the word for covenant's not mentioned anywhere in the context, right? But the concept is there. And I would argue that the concept of a Sabbath is actually in Genesis 1, but the express wording is not there. That would be the case later, but it's just not the case in Genesis 1. And so, anyway, the Sabbath is not a creation ordinance. I think there is great evidence to the contrary. The Sabbath was first given under the Old/Mosaic covenant. Now, he's identifying the Old and the Mosaic covenant, which I would take issue with, because I think the Abrahamic covenant, or the covenant of circumcision, has the same formal and material basis as the Mosaic covenant does, but that's another discussion. The Sabbath was first given under the Mosaic covenant. I don't understand how he could say this and in the same breath cite Exodus 16, which actually in chronology occurs before the covenant was cut between God and Moses, or God and Israel. And it's in Exodus 16 where the people of Israel are seen as observing the Sabbath. Now, he seems to indicate here, as God redeemed Israel in a mighty exodus, the Sabbath was given to the nation. In Exodus 16, a Sabbath is not given. The command is restipulated in Exodus 16, but it's not given for the first time. And indeed, it's not the first time that the people of Israel were keeping the Sabbath. And the reason I know that is because if you actually look at Exodus 16, in verse 22, you'll see what I mean. In verse 22 of Exodus 16, it says, "And so it was on the sixth day that they gathered twice as much bread." Hold up. It's not until after this point that God actually gives the commandment, or restipulates the commandment, I would say. So here, the people are already assuming they need twice the quantity that they normally have. Why? Because the following day is the Sabbath, and there's no gathering permitted then. And then God actually restipulates the commandment and is extra specific. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil. Lay up for yourselves all that remains to be kept until morning. And I don't think God is there issuing a commandment for something that was totally new to them. Indeed, I believe the people of Israel, or the Hebrews at this time, they were already observing a Sabbath because of the pattern that was established back in Genesis 1. And the proof of that, I believe, is in Exodus 16:22, where they were already gathering a double quantity for the next day. So this is something. The Sabbath is something that has been established or practiced or observed prior to the institution of the Mosaic covenant. So I don't understand really how he could say the Sabbath was first given under the Mosaic covenant, when in fact in Exodus 16, which is prior to the giving of the covenant, the people of Israel are observing a Sabbath day. And again, they're just resting like God rested. That's all the Sabbath means. They're resting on the seventh day. That's all the Sabbath means. The other thing I would point to is Exodus 20, the commandment itself says to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. Now, you can't remember something that you don't have previous knowledge concerning. You can't remember something that you do not have previous experience with. Okay, so how are the people to remember the Sabbath day if there was no Sabbath day in the past? And how are the people to keep a day holy that didn't exist in the past? You can't keep something holy that was not previously existent to this point. It would be like me saying, son, be sure to keep your shirt dry. Well, that assumes that he already has a shirt that is dry, and now he has the duty to continue in keeping it dry, or he has the duty to maintain it in its dryness. And so the commandment itself demonstrates that there was a Sabbath principle at work prior to the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. Okay, let's move on to point 3. The Sabbath is fulfilled in Christ. The Sabbath is fulfilled in Christ. And all I would say to this is, every moral imperative, call it the law, call it the moral law, call it whatever you want, but every moral imperative was fulfilled by Jesus Christ. This does not mean that every moral imperative no longer applies to the people of God within the new covenant. Okay? Jesus says explicitly in Matthew 5:17, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." He expressly says that he's not coming to destroy these things that have been spoken beforehand. He came to fulfill them. Interestingly, he says later on in this section that he believes Hebrews is the most explicit form or the greatest evidence of the abrogation of the Sabbath. And he cites Hebrews 3:7 and Hebrews 4:11, or Hebrews 3:7 through Hebrews 4:11. And I'm not sure why he does that. Because if you look at Hebrews 4, and if you look at specifically Hebrews 4:11, then you cannot get away from the fact that just the opposite is occurring. In verse 9, go back to verse 9, Hebrews 4, verse 9. "So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God." That's Hebrews 9 or 4:9 in the New American Standard. In the New King James Version, it doesn't have the word Sabbath there, but the actual word in the Greek is sabbatismos, which just means a resting, and is used in reference to the rest day that God instituted in the Old Testament. Now, this is a conversation that is much broader than what we can gloss here in this episode. But I will give a kind of, hopefully a helpful observation. God rested upon his completion of the old creation, and Christ also rests upon the completion of the new creation, and the new creation is his body resurrected, and of course we are brought into that. We are brought into that and united to him and have the same state, and will have the same state in him. But the new creation is finished. The work required for the new creation is complete, even though we don't currently see it now. And when does Christ enter his rest? That is, when is he raised from the dead? And the indelible seal of completion is put on his work, by the way, in that resurrection. He's raised for our justification. So, when does Christ enter his rest? When is he raised from the dead? He's raised from the dead on the first day. So, God enters his rest on the seventh day of creation, or on the seventh day after creating the old creation. After making the old creation, he enters his rest on the seventh day. After creating the new creation, Jesus Christ enters his rest on the first day of the week. There's also a helpful principle, I think, that while the Sabbath in the Old Testament was work, then rest. That was the principle, right? You work 6 days out of the week, and then you rest on the seventh. Well, the Christian Sabbath is on the first day of the week, so it means we rest first, and then we work. It's a beautiful picture of regeneration and justification happening right now or in the present. And then after that, we go on to complete good works. It's kind of this idea of, well, we're saved not by our good works, we're saved for good works. All right, and I think that is a helpful way to kind of see the relationship between these two Sabbaths. And obviously, there's a change, right? There's a change because there's been a large covenantal shift from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. And one of the ways that shift becomes apparent is in a change in the positive law, which is the way in which we are to observe the rest principle. Now, I will say the rest principle has always been around since creation. I believe that's what's instituted. That's what's instituted at creation, is this rest principle. You cannot have any sort of society or human government without rest. And so that rest principle is a creation ordinance. God, however, was pleased to offer up also a positive law that would specify the specific day on which that rest was to take place and what was to take place on that day of rest. And positive laws can change. While natural ordinances never change, natural laws never change. They're the same always. Positive laws do. And so while the rest principle never goes out of existence or changes really in any substantial way, the positive law annexed to it does change. So whereas the positive law said in the Old Testament, well, here's this rest principle, and on top of that you had rest on the seventh day, and there were several things that were supposed to happen on that day. In the New Covenant, that positive law has changed. It's the first day now. And one of the things that grieves me about these discussions on the Sabbath is helpful discussions, or distinctions rather. Helpful distinctions are never made, which really need to be in the Christian's toolbox before even getting into these kinds of conversations. One of those distinctions being the natural and positive, or the moral and positive laws that I just alluded to. So anyway, guys, I hope that this was a helpful kind of gloss of the issues here brought up by Dr. Wellum. And thanks to him, we got to have this conversation. So thanks to him. He is a brother in the Lord, I believe. He's a sharp mind. I appreciate a lot of his work. I think a lot of what he's done has been good and fruitful. But I just think he's wrong here. And I think it's a shame that he attacks the Christian Sabbath so consistently and so often as he does, and so robustly, I might add. But I do think the truth is on our side, and on the side of Christian orthodoxy. It's Christians everywhere throughout the ages have understood there to be a Christian Sabbath. So this really shouldn't. It's one of those things it's so debatable today, but it really shouldn't be debatable at all. There are many things debatable today that really shouldn't be debatable. So anyways, guys, if this was helpful to you in any way, please go ahead and click the thumbs up. If it wasn't, click the thumbs down. Let me know why. And don't forget to click the subscribe button. I think I'm supposed to say that down here. And the bell for continued notifications. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day.